Alright, here I am in Patna, ancient Pataliputra, and you can see the stupa behind me. I'm in the Buddhist Smriti Park, which was actually opened by the Dalai Lama in 2010 to celebrate 2,550 years of the Buddha's parinirvana. So what happened when the Buddha died, basically. He was snuffed out. He escaped from the wheel of samsara. So this magnificent park was designed and constructed in honor of that. So this place, Pataliputra, it's a very old town. So it's founded by Ajatasattu, the ruler of Magadha, ancient Indian state, who actually shifted his capital here from Rajgir, just up the road where I've just been, where Vulture Peak is. And it remained the capital through a series of dynasties that ruled Magadha and the surrounding area. So the Shishunaga Empire, so 4th and 3rd centuries BC, the Mauryan Empire, 4th to the 2nd centuries BC, the Gupta Empire, so the 3rd to the 6th centuries AD, and the Pala Empire, so 8th century to the 12th century, or the 13th century AD. Now during the Mauryan Empire, in the reign of the great Buddhist Emperor Ashoka, Pataliputra, or Patna, may have been one of the largest cities on earth, with something like 150,000 to 400,000 inhabitants. It's mentioned and actually briefly described in some Greek texts, including Megasthenes' Indica, which is the Indian Things, the book about India, which is actually lost, but we have some fragments of it. And one of them talks about the capital of this empire being Pataliputra, which we assume is Pataliputra because the description of it matches the city in other ways. Pataliputra, a very large and wealthy city. Later it's mentioned by Strabo and also Elian. So the Chinese traveler Xuanzang, who visited in 637, found the city in ruins. So by that time, the old city had long been deserted, and what Xuanzang found was a small city surrounded by a wooden palisade, and we think it only had less than 1,000 inhabitants. So what happened to this great city of Pataliputra? Well, we don't know, but there are some suggestions in the scholarship that it may have been a flood. So Ganges is right here. These rivers change their courses over time, and that may have actually done for this city. At least it might have severely damaged the old city and led to this foundation of this new town. So yeah, here we are, and later on I'll tell you a little bit about Kumrahar, which is the main archaeological site in the city. But that's it for now. So here we are in Kumrahar Park in Patna, and as you can see, it's quite an extensive park here, public park in the middle of the city. But what I want to focus on here is the remains, the archaeological remains. And as you can see, there isn't much here. There's one pillar over there, and there's several sort of fragments of pillars here. But this is, well, we think it might be the remains of Ashoka's palace, or at least a structure put up in the time of Ashoka. Ashoka being this great Buddhist emperor of the Mauryan Empire in the 3rd century BC, who waged a war against the Kalinga, and then because of all the suffering that war had caused, he committed to Buddhism, and he put up all these inscriptions all over his empire, talking about his story and Buddhism and so on and so forth. So if this is something by Ashoka, it's pretty significant, especially because we know that the 3rd Buddhist council, or at least tradition holds that the 3rd Buddhist council was held here around 250 BC, supposedly at Ashoka's palace in Pataliputra. And Pataliputra is modern Patna. These Buddhist councils were these sort of big meetings of monks that were intended to define Buddhism and to reform Buddhism in various ways, and to get together a body of texts. So kind of like the great councils in the Christian world at the beginning of in the early church. All right, so what do we have here? So this is really the results of a series of excavations, firstly by the US archaeologist David Brainerd Spooner, who excavated in 1912 and 1913. And what he found was this one pillar of polished stone. I mean, that was the major find, really. This one quite large pillar of polished stone, you can see it there. And he also found 72 pits of ash and rubble, which they think marked the spots where other pillars stood. And presumably these included these fragments of pillars. Now, subsequent excavation by K.P. Jaiswal in 1951, from 1951 to 1955, found 8 more, I think, of these pits, possibly 8 more fragments of pillars. But anyway, he found evidence that suggested there were in fact 8 more pillars. So what have we got? 72 plus 8. So we have 80 pillars, and you can see reconstructions of what the building might have looked like. It probably had 8 rows of 10 pillars. There were 4.57 meters between each of the pillars. 2.74 meters of the pillars were underground, and then they would have stood at 9 meters and 75 in height. Now, they didn't find any other stone constructions in this area, and so the presumption is that this would have been a building with a wooden roof and probably no walls at all, so it was just open to the air. And yeah, as I say, this is possibly the venue for the third Buddhist Council. Of course, it's very tempting to link what we find to great historical events or great events that are, said to have happened in the tradition. But really, we don't know. It could have been anything. Some people call it the Great Assembly Hall. And we know there were some assemblies, institutions like that in this period. But this is all that remains. And if you make the journey to Pataliputra, modern Patna, as I have, and you go to this big park in the middle of this extremely busy city, this is now all that you will find. And yeah, I still think it's pretty cool, but it's not much. Okay, so having just said that there's nothing more to see in Kumrahar Park in Patna than what I was just discussing, which is the so-called 80-pillar hall, perhaps from Ashoka's palace, I discover that I've actually missed some things. So one of the things I missed was, I think this is actually the only major thing I missed in the park. It's still visible in the park. This is the Arogya Vihar. So Vihar just means monastery, but this seems to have been a kind of medical center that was running from the 4th to the 5th centuries AD. And one of the reasons we think it's a medical center is because we found this sherd of pottery with this word, or really name, on it, Dharvantare. And Dharvantare was this legendary founder of Ayurveda medicine, traditional medical system, and also receives cult as a god of medicine. Besides that, there are lots of finds, small finds, clay figurines, and things like that, which have been put in the museum. Now, this used to be the Patna Museum, but when I went to the Patna Museum today, found it was closed, and I was directed to this new museum, a splendid new museum, a regional museum, the Museum of the State of Bihar, the Bihar Museum. And in there, you'll find, everything of importance that they found in Kumrahar. And I'll just pick out one really interesting object. So this artifact is sometimes called the Bodh Gaya plaque. So it's a terracotta plaque, and as you can see, it shows what looks an awful lot like a temple. And actually, it looks an awful lot like the temple that's now in Bodh Gaya, which I'm going to make another video about, which marks the spot where the Buddha supposedly reached enlightenment seated under a tree, which is now called the Bodhi tree. So there is apparently a Kharosthi inscription right at the bottom of this plaque. And Kharosthi isn't actually used in inscriptions in northern India after about the 3rd century AD. So if this plaque is actually from before the 3rd century AD, that's very interesting, because the Mahabodhi temple, we think, was probably built in its present form under the Guptas, so sometime like the 5th or 6th centuries AD. We know that, or we hear that, it was the first temple there was actually built by Ashoka in the 3rd century BC, but we don't think that would have looked as grand as this kind of temple. And these kinds of temples actually only become popular later on. So it's a bit of a mystery. There's also some other funny things about this. If this is supposed to be the Mahabodhi temple, if you look at the Buddha, he looks like he's making the hand gesture, the mudra associated with blessings and peace, rather than the touching the earth hand gesture, which is the usual one when you're depicting Buddha at the moment of enlightenment, which of course is what the Mahabodhi site and temple is all about. So that's a bit of a mystery, but I just wanted to add this very interesting piece, which is also found at Kumrahar, just to complete the story.